Welcome back to another episode of Mind Games with Garen Emig. That's me, columnist, podcaster for Sellout Crowd, our network of talented writers and broadcasters. Kicking off another show. Thanks very much for tuning in. First of all, don't take that for granted. Love having you along for the ride. We do this every week, and we try to do, because of the name of the show, a little thinking with our guests. We got inside the mind of Joe Castiglione last week. We go from one athletic director involved in a pretty big football game Saturday to the other. Rick Dickson is my guest this week. He's the AD at the University of Tulsa, and has some thoughts, I would imagine, on another name familiar to OU fans, Kevin Wilson, his new football coach. He's got the Hurricane sort of reshaping their program and off to a 1-1 start. We'll talk a little bit about Rick's own career at TU and his two stints as athletic director, some of the challenges that he faces at a place like the University of Tulsa. But first things first, most important of all, and I know you're going to be aces on this, man. You guys had a concert a month ago at Chapman Stadium, right?
We did.
Motley Crue, Alice Cooper, and Def Leppard played Chapman. You've got to tell me some kind of backstage story from that experience.
Well, that's a good segue backstage because we literally were backstage for the entire week. Because those that have been out here, Garen, like yourself, know. I mean, literally for a week, an army of about 1,000 had encamped on us, right on our operation and so forth. So we really got to see things, from day one. And I'd forgotten, having not been that close to that kind of a mega concert since my old days at TU, when I, as a young 30-something-year-old AD, thought having new kids on the block was a really enlightening idea. And so I hadn't seen that kind of operation, and it's changed, I can tell you, over 30 years. But to watch the entire operation unfold over a week, and to the monstrosity of a stage that they built that went from the goal line to the 30-yard line, those kind of things. These are mega events. But it was quite enlightening. I was getting calls by the minute, from our teams trying to navigate around, saying they won't let us into our gym, or they can't get back into our locker room, and those kind of things. So I had to do some navigating and negotiating through it. But everybody chipped in. It was really great thing for TU and a great thing for the community. So we all did our part.
No after party?
If I'm certain, well, it's interesting you asked that, because that group's
Here we go.
That group was old when I was young. Those groups. And so no, I didn't even see the last act. So I doubt that any of that crew had a major after party. I think those are in the rearview mirror.
We're gonna get something to come out before we're done. Something's got to come out. You got Sean King, dude. You should be a concert promoter in your next life. You got Sean Kingston playing Saturday, right? At your tailgate before the OU game.
Yes, it'll be great. We got Tailgating Village opens at 10:30, and I think Sean will come on at about 12. So it's going to be fun. In fact, I was giving a report to our board of trustees yesterday, and just in recapping kind of everything up until this point.
Yeah.
Pointed, from the last year, and then where things are today, and kind of the crescendo of kind of momentum, energy, things that have been happening for a couple years. And I said, we'll likely have the biggest, pregame activity, fest, crowds, maybe in our at least modern history, I would think, on Saturday. So it's going to be fun. That's
great.
That was the whole intent.
Sure.
Garen, when we really got, back here and realized somewhere along the way we kind of lost sight of that, maybe of being a catalyst in the community and creating energy, and knowing that, we got a great audience in this community of Tulsa. One of the facts, for a whole different purpose, I was sharing with our board yesterday. This was about the impact of college football. And we had partnered with the Nielsen Company to get a study done on the last 2 years of our football, basketball ratings and the impact and media value. And a game like this weekend that's on, over uh, a linear,
Hmm.
ESPN2, I guess, will probably be somewhere in the 16 to 20 million worth of media value for the university, for the city, those kind of things. And that's the impact, financially that college football has today and can have around the country. And so to kind of be the facilitator and catalyst for doing that, that's an important thing for us, for both our TU community and Tulsa.
Rick, you came back to your alma mater 3 years ago. I want to make sure. I think I got that right.
Yeah.
I got to think I got
October
the
of
date.
20, I think.
Yeah, you were here in the early '90s, '90 to '94.
Yeah, I really came in, Garrett, as a associate AD in the summer of '88.
Yeah.
By the spring of '89, so less than 9 months, had become interim AD, and then I think 9 months later, after they took off the interim tag, and then left late spring of '94, really right after our first Sweet 16 with
Hmm.
Tubby Smith.
Yeah. You, I'm going to guess here, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that the biggest difference between then and now, and you, you were touching on it just a second ago about the importance of exposure
Hmm.
and pumping some life back into game day over
Hmm.
there at Chapman. That's always been a challenge. I'm not saying it wasn't you know your first tour of duty,
Right,
but I assume because of the chase for revenue and brand,
right.
those are the words, the buzzwords in your profession. I would assume that is such a harder deal for you now because Joe C can, he's got a built-in situation in Norman, obviously. Chad Weiberg down the road in Stillwater at OSU doesn't have to worry quite as much about that. You do. And is that the biggest difference between now and then for you?
Uh,
Or was that
yeah, I
always
was going
hard?
to say actually very similar. I can recall early on, 89, 90, knowing when I first took over, we had to energize and lift up
Okay.
fan base, and we went on a campaign to have our season ticket drive and things like that, and we had a phenomenal turnout that first year, and those were the days too when TU had Skelly Stadium was 40,000 capacity,
Hmm.
and by '91, and part of it was those efforts, part of it was scheduling that year. We had Oklahoma State, we had Texas A&M, we had Miami, all
Yeah.
in Skelly Stadium
Wow.
that year,
Right.
and then ended up averaging just under, I think, 33,000 at that time, and that's when we started doing some things. There, I think we actually did. We called them block parties, where we used to block off 11th Street and had stages at both ends of 11th between Delaware and Harvard, and kind of first started, trying to create atmosphere and
Right.
energy around, and just the whole idea from my standpoint was just the connecting of TU and Tulsa. I mean, one of the facts that I shared with our board, I didn't finish up on the Nielsen part of it, was uh, they 49% of in the greater metro area of Tulsa, the 1.1, 49%, just over about 540,000, identify as a college football fan. That's ninth in the country. 15% of them identify as a TU football fan.
Mm.
What does that mean? To identify means they've either bought a ticket, viewership, watched games, talk about it online, things like that. But I think that figure was like 158,000 that identify as a TU football fan.
Yeah.
And so that tells me kind of what I think I'd known instinctively, throughout growing up here, living here, going to school, playing here, was that there's an appetite and an audience. It's just not traditional,
Hmm.
not alums. They're not students. Most of them don't work here.
Yeah.
Those things. That's a minuscule part of it. But there are people that appreciate the history, the product, and if you can make it appealing and enjoyable and affordable, I've always believed they'll come.
Hmm. Well, the job to make the product on the field appealing
Mhm.
is now Kevin Wilson's. 2 games into his tenure, as your head football coach, Rick. You and I had a really long and very candid conversation about him recently. I've got a column about Kevin up on selloutcrowd.com, GarenEmic.com, if you want to try to spell it, that I think those who like either OU or TU should read. It's really interesting. Kevin's answers to my questions at the press conference Tuesday, more detailed and introspective than I anticipated, to be honest. Rick, you hired a guy that, point blank, a lot of athletic directors might not have, because of the way that his tenure at Indiana finished 7 years ago. Why was he your guy? Why was he the right guy for this job?
I thought so. I mean, record aside, if you look at even their own history, and as you know, and most know, I've been at some challenging places myself,
Mm-hmm.
and yet a place, a program, obviously an iconic and reputable university, and but from the product side, Indiana football had not been operated at a high level in the Big Ten, those things, but for whatever reasons, never had the level of success that of other programs that he'd been part of and around, their peers in the Big Ten. But so really, Garen, I have always been, one that measures things more by how you move the needle.
Mm-hmm.
From your time of sitting in a seat to your time of leaving it, how you move the needle, and so in that regard, he had certainly done that. Maybe some of the stylistic part of those things, one of a first time head coach, two of maybe a place that wasn't accustomed to that style and the hard charging of,
Yeah.
not only are we going to succeed, we're going to do it now. Might have been the wrong, the wrong approach, or one that they weren't ready for. The other things that were rumored or reported, we did as deep a dive as I've ever done,
Mm-hmm.
and came away in large part because of the kind of consistent from very disconnected people. Some that were his competitors, that had coached against him, some that had been, in some level of responsibility over him and things like that. And so there was not anything that came back to me that alarmed me, that substantiated those things, other than maybe the stylistic, and those weren't so much centered around managing athletes, but maybe interacting with others, whether it was staff and people like that. And I didn't have any of those after meeting him, several rounds of interviews, as we were going through the process, and then face to face, and then having our own candid conversations, just, came to a place that, okay, here's someone that has pedigree, has, the experience, has a lot of the skill sets, a lot of the things even broader that I was looking for, of, knew this region, knew and appreciated what a University of Tulsa was in the
Mm-hmm.
football landscape, had a history sense of what the recruiting plan, connected to successful eras here should be. In this case, had deep ties to it throughout here in Texas, those type of things, and also some of the things that our program needed, from emphasis on academics and discipline and so forth. So that's kind of was the kind of the process and timeline of how that occurred.
And for the record, so far so good was your sentiment with me during that conversation. I told you this, Rick. I knew you were getting a really good football coach. I've covered Kevin
Yeah.
since he first got to OU in 20, crazy to think, 21 years ago. My first encounter with him was about a returning freshman All-American center. He told me he was a backup because he hadn't quite bought into practice. So right away, I knew what OU was getting and what I was getting from a hardcore football guy. I get it. What you have to be comfortable with, though, is communication. And when I asked
Right.
Kevin Tuesday what he had learned, or no, it wasn't, I take that back. I said, what how are you different or better from your first head coaching experience at Indiana? And the first thing he said was communication. That, to from your standpoint, has been positive to this point.
Extremely. It really has, Garen. I've 30, whatever it's been, 33 years of doing this.
Yeah.
And everyone from my teammate, Dave Rader, to others that I've worked with, all good people.
Right.
Kevin, honestly, in from December, till we sit here today, 7 months, whatever that's been, has been as just low maintenance as anybody I ever worked with. And, we've agreed to agree early on. Look, if, it's a new start, a new place,
Right.
not just a redux of other places you've been. We've got to do things differently here. We're a smaller fishbowl. If you do something here at 9 o'clock, it'll be on the president's desk by 10:30.
Yeah.
That's the way it works here. So understanding the environment he was coming into, and I said, if there's something I said, look, I got a pretty busy plate to keep this thing running, and I'm all over the place in the city. But if you need something, text me, call me,
Yeah. Right.
and we'll figure out how to go forward. And he's been excellent about operating that way. And I think he appreciates the fact that I'm available. And if I can fix something or say, you know what, that's a 2 on our scale today. Don't worry about it. Just get past it. He's operated that way. And I think it's gone great. I've been very pleased overall, and pleased for him too. We both know, like you said earlier, not everybody would have given a second chance. I've learned that over time is that sometimes you have to look beyond things and see circumstances and evaluate that. So I don't, there's nothing there. I'm 30 something years of doing this, pride myself above all, Garen, about being a student athlete, AD. Kids know me everywhere I've been, even here today, know me by my first name, call me by my first name, a few other names, but mostly by my first one. And I take pride in that, because that's always been my motivation, passion of doing this, is I want to be there for them, to help shepherd them from this opportunity start to conclusion. I always, at our graduation days, we do a reception, and I tell the families, this is my national championship day. When they're here in that point and you're here celebrating today, that's the greatest victory, because I know firsthand what that allows them to do the rest of their lives. So,
Yeah.
So I've always been that person. And I tell our kids this, I want you to be challenged. I won't allow for you to be diminished, disrespected, or treated in a way. Now, challenged is a different thing. And so that's fitting into that
Sure.
outlook pretty nicely.
Yep. It's been a really cool week on the Wilson front because of all the stories about his old days with Brent Venables, the guy he's going to be coaching against Saturday. Some of the, I thought I'd heard everything. I hadn't. As it turns out, I love some of the stuff about watching Little League games. All the coaches had the same age boys, just getting away from the job, watching Little League. The Kevin telling the story about whether he or Mike Stoops would yell louder in the football complex as to who got dibs on getting the most
competition, I'm sure.
Oh my Lord. I've heard some stories. I thought Kevin had ducked out of the Mike Stoops volume, but perhaps that was just impossible. Hey, you and I, what's cool about talking to you is that you're not afraid to be candid about just everything, whether it's a football coach or something that needs to be generated around TU athletics or challenges, whether financial, academic, or whatnot. Maybe the first encounter we had where we really got into some mechanisms 2 years ago when the world was going crazy. OU and Texas were going to the Big 12. The Big 12 countered by taking teams out of your conference, the American. And, oh, by the way, you were signing on from interim AD to an extension, I think, around the same time. And Rick, you were the first one of, if not the first administrator who mentioned the prospect of, where this is headed, don't you? NFL light, that eventually it's going to be sort of a consolidation as much as a realignment when it comes to this stuff. What led you to that conclusion then, and have you changed your opinion since?
I mean, there's always, there's always variables or unknown factors that along the way come up and maybe change thinking. I think we're maybe, it's hard to say this. I was actually giving a report to our board yesterday on this, and I said I've got to kind of preface this by saying, things seem to be calm. Saying that in this day and time is pretty crazy, right?
Be careful.
Yeah, because there's some thought out there that with just the instability signals coming out of the ACC that may be the next Pac-12 implosion. Who knows? That schools outwardly sending out signals that say we don't like being bound down. We think we're behind. It's really, Karen. It's so distasteful for me in a way, is that it's solely, I mean, the competition that has trumped everything now is it's really about that late June, early July announcements. You see them in about a 10-day period. Just something that struck me 20 something years ago, like, gee, I wonder why we're publicizing that. Every conference would come out within about a 7-day period and announce what their earnings were, what their distributions were for that year. So it took on this competition every, right around the first week of July, the end of the fiscal years of, oh, our schools are getting 20 million, or our schools are getting 50, or now 70. And all of a sudden that competition is really what's been the impetus to, of all this instability. And here's the disappointing thing, that just disregard for what's made college athletics so great, in my estimation and opinion. And I think, and I tell a lot of my proteges out there, there's quite a few, saying, especially before I got back in and was consulting and helping them, saying, you're playing a pretty risky game, because some of these, and one is, you never know, that media rights arc will always stay on an ascent. There's the probability things flatten or even possibly tank a little bit. And if you're used to operating on a certain tank of gas and it changes, you better know how to adapt. And, so there's that part of it. And other things that we've tossed to the side, which is history and regionality and rivalries and those things that, built really the unique following, popularity. And we just transitioned to a business model only. So now that's the one competition that drives everything. So back to your question. So I've said that because once you start seeing them park all those things that I thought built equity in college athletics that we just mentioned, parked them to the curb and said it's only about money. Well, the easiest way to pursue that was to keep going, migrating towards bigger entities, bigger platforms, bigger conferences, greater dollars. Okay, well that's about plateaued. I don't think those major conferences will take 25 or 30 members each. They're getting to that capacity, right?
Right.
Well, the only way to make that next jump and transition is to then, whether it's votes in the boardroom or whatever they self-identify as, we're the biggest brands, and meaning others they're with now will get left behind, just like schools have along the way and conferences have. And that number, now maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's a number of 50, maybe, but it seems with the precedents out there like NFL, NBA, that something in the 30s will be a marketable product and property to go get the biggest dollar in the market. And so that, it seems like everything has led and pointed towards that. Now they're kind of at that last station, and it may stay somewhat stable for 3-5 years, but there'll come a point where that early July, declaration of here's how much we distributed will force people to say, well, we got to have more. And the only thing left to do is go out in the marketplace with the biggest brands. So could be totally off base, but it's just somebody that's been living it for 30 years sure seems like that's what's lining up.
Yep. And then that leads me to a quick follow up. How much do you worry about TU's place in that structure?
You know, uh,
Or are you already there and that's just again the day-to-day life of
yeah,
somebody
it's
in the city right
you're always going to be effective. And think of it, Garen, because what was it, 92 or three, when the very first kind of tremors and
now?
earthquake happened with Arkansas. That was at least in my career. So over 30 years now, there's always been some sense of it. Never like what we've seen the last half dozen years in terms of the volume of it. Yeah, that part of it, I think TU's always going to compete. Will we be a super brand? Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I mean, I think we are. We've done that as a university, whether we're allowed to have the capability to or the resources to do that. Uh, that will play itself out. We'll always have a place in it. Is that I look at just the last 30 years of
Hmm.
what this smallest place competing has done in a variety of its sports and even flagship sports, and it's
Hmm.
pretty remarkable. Even coming back, I would jokingly say this as I've got back to my Tulsa and my friends from other tribes, my OU, OSU friends in Arkansas, and I'd just say, "Gosh, does it bother you guys at all that not only your schools but your entire leagues haven't had a first round draft choice the last 2 years, and this little place has?" Those kind of things. So just a little needle here and
Oh,
there.
for sure. I hear you. I hear you. You have every right. Um, I talked to you for another hour if I could, man, but I know you've got more important things than mind games to get to. So a couple of questions real quick, exit questions. Have a little fun. We'll let you move on about your day.
Bet.
Strangest coach search story in your career?
Say that again.
The strangest coach search story that you've encountered in
Oh
your time
gosh.
as an athletic director here at Washington State, Tulane, or here the first time?
There's been a few, for sure. Here's a great one. I say this very respectfully
Okay.
because I was fond of him, and so some period ago, it would have been the period that Mike Leach was out from the Texas Tech, and connected with him. Had somebody reach out on his behalf. I remember flying from Greenville, North Carolina, East Carolina University after a Saturday game,
Mm-hmm.
which is a hard place to find and get to another hard place to get to, which is Key West, Florida, and connected with Mike Leach, and talked to him 2 or 3 times beforehand, and then got down there and let him know I was checked in. Hey, do you want to come over, have a visit here? We'll sit out on the patio, and so I go outside and looking around, and the attendants for the hotel where I was staying at, I see him waving, and they're talking to somebody riding up on a bicycle, a little Stingray bicycle, and the guys. The young men that were the parking lot attendants, they were saying, "Oh, hola, Miguel, nice to see you," and so forth. And I look up, and it's Mike Leach riding up to interview with me in shorts, flip flops, and a riding a Stingray bicycle.
Miguel Leach,
Yes,
apparently.
yes, exactly. So we visit that night. We have a great visit. The next morning, I go. He said, "Hey, come over." He said, "I'm doing a little podcast, and we'll visit in his villa down there some more before I flew out." And went. He said, "Come on in, backyard." He said, "I'll let you sit in on this," and so forth. So the program, I think it was a Sirius radio program, was called Sports for Dorks. So that was my interaction with Mike Leach. Was like,
Oh man,
"Hey, here we go." I said, "You'll fit in New Orleans, Louisiana pretty dang well."
I wish I'd heard that before I named my show, Rick. That I would have ripped that name off for what we're doing,
Well,
for what I do, not what you do. You're no dork, but I qualify. So a little late to that party, I'm afraid. That's just when you think you've heard every Mike Leach story. You haven't. You never will. You never will.
you never.
You played it to you from 72 to 76 once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
True or false? You're the one that talked Drew Pearson into switching from quarterback to receiver.
No, no, because I wouldn't have done that because that wouldn't have been in my best interest, right? Being a defensive back, I would have done that. But
That did occur.
here's a
That did
funny.
occur, though, right? Someone had the idea.
Someone did, but I was a lowly freshman, Drew's senior year, and he was one of our captains, along with another guy that I looked up to, Ray Rhodes. Those two guys were receivers for us at the time, and I can remember that first training camp lining up, and covering guys one on one and thing. And I knew about Drew and Ray Rhodes, and both NFL guys. Obviously, Drew a Hall of Famer. Ray went on to become a two-time NFL head coach, and,
Yeah, right.
and others. We had many others as well. And I think I just turned 18 right before camp, and I'm figuring this out. And I'm thinking, man, after the first couple of days, like I don't want to be like either number 3 or number 5 because that puts me with against head up against Drew or head up against Ray Rhodes or this person or that person. I said, let me place myself in line where I line up against my roommate. I can handle him. Well, that was the best of them all, Steve Largent. So,
Oh my, there it is. There's the hammer right there.
so that just tells you, even early on, my calculating skills weren't what they should have been.
Oh, you've done better as an AD. I'll give you that compliment.
Yeah, that's my
Okay, last one. You were a Bishop Kelly Comet before you became a Golden Hurricane.
AHS.
We'll bring it back to where we started the show. You got OU on the schedule this weekend. There's a legend that just about anyone who grows up and wants to play college football in this state, even if they won't admit it, wants to wear the crimson and cream. Will you admit that to me now, or were you always going to be TU blue?
It's hard. Listen, as old as I'm getting, it's hard to think about what I may have been thinking that long ago. I actually did a recruiting trip in '71. In fact, my recruiting trip was that game of the century.
That was your recruiting trip?
It was my recruiting trip.
Oh, my goodness.
And also got one to Notre Dame because a lot of it because of the Tulsa, particularly Catholic connection with Notre Dame. So maybe, being one of the better city Tulsa kids at a Catholic high school, got a trip. A gentleman came through. Kevin O'Grady, I believe, was the recruiter, former defensive lineman from Notre Dame. And maybe it was Kevin Grady if he was Irish, he probably had to be O'Grady, right? So, and I happened to have a particular good game the night he came through. I think he was scouting somebody else. I got a trip out of those two places, but not an offer from either one. But, a lot for me was the opportunity to maybe, have an opportunity to play two sports, which, Tulsa was that one opportunity. My family, my roots, everybody around me, nuclear family and extended family are all Oklahoma State alums. My dad played basketball there, met my mom there. All brothers and sisters went there. But, just lukewarm attention from then in those days.
Okay.
So TU stood out.
Yeah. It's worked out pretty well for you.
Worked out pretty well.
Yes. We're going to call this episode of Mind Games Rick Dickson in the Eye of the Hurricane. He's taken us there, and we are fortunate for that. Thank you so much for your time. So good to speak with you, catch up with you. We'll do it again down the road at some point, I promise. We'll do another Mind Game soon on the Sellout Crowd Network. In the meantime, like and subscribe, all that stuff on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. For Jacqueline Musgrove, the producer, Michael Lane, the creative director, this has been Garen Emig wishing you a great day and enjoy the OUTU game this weekend.